This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. All right, good evening. You are once again in tune with Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu, and you're listening to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about difficult art, sometimes great trash, but I think we're talking more in the context of difficult art today. And my guest is Derrick Sims. How's it going, Derrick? Thank you very much for coming on.
That's great. Thank you for asking me to come on.
Now, we met because you taught me how to point lights at people's heads when work paid for me to do a video course at UCOL. So thank you very much for doing that. Yeah, it's been very useful.
I remember pointing a light at your head, a big round circular light. And do you remember that?
Yeah. I think that video is probably still floating around.
It's a private video on my YouTube,
But the thing that the thing that we kind of arrived at to talk about started from a specific movie, but could probably expand to include the filmmaker, because I think the movie embodies some stuff about his body of work that makes him both really interesting and like potentially a hard watch for some people under some circumstances. And that's Nicolas Winding Refn's movie, The Neon Demon. Well, that's where we're going to start from. And I heard a very, very short and deliberately facile synopsis of this where I can't remember who it was, but it was basically the lead into someone's review of more in-depth and more interesting review of this movie on their YouTube channel, where they were like, I get the sense that someone just kind of mimes joint gesture, turned to their friend and said, you ever noticed that models look really weird?
And that was the beginning.
So Neon Demon is, you were telling me all kinds of interesting stuff before I hit go, so we'll maybe get back to that. But about how the movie actually changed in the course of its creation. It didn't start as being called The Neon Demon, for one thing, but it's an incredibly slow and deliberate and very visually stylized horror movie where the horror is never entirely clearly explained, that takes place in the fashion industry.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
I think it's a lot more than that. And again, so I watched it last night. I haven't seen it in a few years, but it's funny. I went to IMDb afterwards because I typically rate movies whenever I saw them. And I went to IMDb and I'm like, I gave this movie a 9. This was before I watched it. I'm like, okay, here we go. Let's see what I like so much about it, And yeah, I got more out of it this time than I did the first time. I think this is probably the third time I've seen it. But I think there's a heck of a lot more going on in that. I think the movie is about the creative process and about falling in love with yourself and the dangers of falling in love with yourself. Because it doesn't end too well.
No, it doesn't. And so, I mean, this is a thing I say from time to time. I kind of fundamentally don't believe in spoilers, and also this movie is a few years old. So if people haven't seen it, I don't know that you necessarily lose that much by knowing what's going to happen, because with the Neon Demon, a lot of it is kind of the weight of the way that things unfold. So I'm going to be quite happy to kind of spoil stuff as it goes along.
Funny enough, I think the ending that is easily the most shocking bit of it, and it's kind of what the average audience member is kind of anticipating, what's going to happen to this person. But I think everything before that ending is far more fascinating than what's afterwards. I mean, and part of it is his visual style. He's just every movie he's ever done. We were talking about Drive before this, and you were talking about it being, I hate the term slow burn, but it is definitely a very slow burn that turns a lot of people off just because the pacing is what it is. But that continues on in Neon Demon. If you go backwards, it's in Bronson. It's in one of my favorites of his that most people haven't seen called Valhalla Rising.
I really want to see Valhalla Rising, and I missed my shot while it was on Netflix, and also failed to get a copy from the DVD store while those things existed. So I have to hunt that down somehow.
I can tell you where it's at. There is one copy in Palmerston North. And it's at the library.
Okay, I will have to track that down.
It's on DVD, and the transfer is not the best, but it's worth your time.
Yeah.
But just like all the rest of them, it's this really slow, often very quiet. There's not a lot of dialogue in his movies, and I really like that. But the visual style is just, up to 11. It's tremendous. And those visuals mixed with a lot of times he uses a lot of synth music. Those visuals with that music create more of a story out of atmosphere rather than out of traditional narrative. And I really like that about him. He's an atmospheric filmmaker, which I find as a cinematographer, that is what appeals to me. A lot of my favorite movies throughout history look good and sound good, and the story is just kind of secondary to that. It's more about the feeling I get from all of these components than a traditional story. Yeah,
well, I mean, to take that to the Neon Demon in particular, the thing that happens in the movie is that this young woman comes to, is it ever specified to be LA? It's like the big city where showbiz happens.
Yeah, they do say LA.
Yeah. And becomes a model despite being underage. And this thing happens where somehow she has a quality of kind of itness, which is kind of communicated as being like really powerful but kind of undefinable. And something from kind of outside starts trying to reach her. But the reason I'm having a hard time saying this is because it's all communicated by visual style, essentially. The way that there's this sense of some sort of external consciousness. My memory is it's kind of implied as coming through the lights that are pointed at her when she's modeling. But it's all really implied by visual style. And so you just kind of have to let it explain itself in that way without ever necessarily laying out in concrete terms what's happening.
Right. And I think there are 100 things you could take away from this movie. And none of them right and none of them wrong at the same time. That's something I really like about his work. And a lot of other works of those kind of filmmakers who create this atmosphere, like Andrei Tarkovsky, who's one of my favorites. It's just kind of like you sit down and it's an experience, and whatever you take from that experience is right and wrong, and it doesn't matter. It's like we can take away completely different things from it, and we're both right, And I love that about it.
Yeah, although, I mean, there is a specific arc to the thing that happens in the movie that he's trying to communicate, I feel like. So you could take different things out of it, and you had that point about it being kind of about the creative process and the power and risk of falling in love with yourself. And I think that's interesting because I think I was trying to explain to one of my daughters, she was talking about how someone was way better at art than her. And I was trying to explain the thing where maybe like technical ability isn't always the thing. It's often much more about my sense of it was like how much yourself you managed to be. And so that in that sense, falling in love with yourself is very good because it means that you can distinguish this personal thing that you're trying to communicate in a way that makes it really distinctive. And that's what makes what would look shonky in somebody else's work like a distinctive rough edge in yours. But yeah, there is a risk to that. And you could certainly read the final bit of the movie where other models turn on this young woman and literally cannibalize her as like when you successfully do that, then people will start trying to take you to bits to find out how you work and taking the wrong lessons out of the things you did.
They will eat you.
Yeah.
Literally. I think there's a fascinating thing that in the male characters in the film. This is the first film he ever did that has almost exclusive female cast. Almost all the rest of his movies are very male dominated. And so that's fascinating. But I read last night that his wife, this is the first script, Refn's wife, this is the first script she ever read of his and liked it, but the thing is, the women in the film, outside of Elle Fanning, who plays, I think her name's Jessie, they are ruthless. Every one of them. They're monsters, literally. And there are very few male characters. There's the Keanu Reeves character, who is a horrible man. But there are two men in the film that when you first see them, you think horrible things about them, but come to find out that's maybe not the case. And I don't think it's bad that I divulge this, but the opening shot of the movie, do you remember that? So it has a great opening credit sequence with all the colors and stuff, but the opening shot of the movie is, I'm not ruining this, Elle Fanning laying out on this couch, and there's just blood all over her, and it looks like she's had her neck cut.
Yeah, I think that? it's like the poster image as well.
Oh, was it? Was it? Yeah. That couch or whatever she's laying on. Yeah. So you see that immediately, and you think, oh my God, this girl's dead. And it slowly pulls back, and you have the synth music playing. It's just these gorgeous, slow kind of pull back with these beautiful lights. And then it cuts to a man in the room who has this deep red light behind him, and he's just kind of staring. You're like, oh my God, he murdered her. He's a horrible, horrible human. And then it cuts back to her. Is it bad that I'm like breaking this thing down?
No. This is the point.
Okay. But it cuts back to her. And then you see these kind of flash boxes, like flash lamps and stuff like that, and you realize, wait a minute, this is strange. Is he photographing a dead person? This is really awful. They come to find out she's not dead at all. It's a photo shoot, and he's not a creep at all. He's just this guy who's taking photos of her. And then, it shows her in the makeup room. She's cleaning up or whatever. And you thought, immediately you thought, this guy's a murderer. He's horrible. He's taken advantage of this girl. He's killed her, and now he's sadistically taking these photographs of her. Well, your ideas about this man are completely wrong. Second instance in the film. Sorry, but this is why I think it's a kind of a look at the creative process, and I think it's more in terms of these two guys. How Refn himself is kind of known to be a bit rough around the edges. He comes from the Danish School of Filmmaking with Lars von Trier, which I don't know if you know Lars von Trier's work, but he's notoriously, scandalous. But back to the movie, there's another photographer who she has to go and visit, and she walks in, she has her makeup on, whatever, she has a dress on, and he asks how old she is. She says 19. He says, all right, this is a close set, everyone leave. And you're like, oh God, what's about to happen, right? And then everyone clears out. Jenna Malone's left behind. She says, hey, I'll stick around, You think she's going to be her savior. And he's like, no, you go too. And you're like, oh man, and it's just this building of dread in this beautiful, perfectly white room, like an infinity wall. And so it almost looks angelic, but you're like, oh man, this is about to go really terribly. And then everyone leaves, and he says, take off your clothes. And then she does, and then he's like, all of them. And you're like, oh man, this is cringe, right? And then he disappears. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
He disappears, and she's just sitting there in this white room, and then he comes back with a box, and he's backlit, and it's very shadowy, and you're thinking, oh man, what's in this box? He opens the box, and it never shows what he pulls out. And goes up, it's a close-up of Elle Fanning, and all of a sudden he's right over her shoulder, like, what is he about to do? All of a sudden his hand goes around her neck, and you're like, oh man, this is horrible. But then he just wipes this gold paint across her neck. And then he starts wiping all this gold paint all over, her shoulders and behind her neck and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, this isn't sinister at all. And then by the end of it, he's just photographing this girl with all this gold paint on her, and it's seemingly harmless. And so again, you have this male character that you think is horrific. Come to find out, no, he's just an artist. And I think that's a commentary on Refn's process because he's a cinephile, man. This guy knows a hell of a lot. I've listened to a lot of interviews with him in the past, and he curates movies for the streaming service Mubi. I don't know if you've heard of Mubi, but he's one of the curators on there. They have a Refn collection, and he even restores kind of smut films from around the world with his own money. But he's a really enigmatic guy who's a huge cinephile. But he kind of gets this probably unwarranted idea about him kind of being, because he has a lot of violence in his movies, and it all feels very masculine and grotesque. But he's like, you know what? I'm just an artist. I think this is him in those two characters saying, hey, I'm just an artist. I'm not here to take advantage of these people. I'm creating a work of art. And so, yeah, that's the long way of saying I think that's what he's doing.
I mean, you make a point about the violence, and there is violence in the kind of final kind of concluding bit of the Neon Demon where Jesse is consumed by the other models, and there's also kind of flashes of violence and drive, and a movie that I mentioned that you said you were not a fan of, but I think if you think it's bad, it's bad in interesting ways.
Oh yeah.
Which is Only God Forgives. Is also like it has some really gruesome violence in it, and I think there's a point being made with the violence being grotesque as well, is that, you know, there's an intention not to rob it of impact. He doesn't just have this beautiful young woman consumed. There's like she gets shoved into a dry swimming pool and breaks her legs, and it's really, really awful.
And it stays with her while she's dying and bleeding out, and you're just like, oh man, this is rough.
Yeah. And so, you know, he's making a point of kind of not letting you off the hook for that. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't invoke violence as an outcome that's going to happen and then not sit with the violence while it happens.
Well, it's not fun violence, right? Another person who does that really well is Guillermo del Toro. You know, you kind of think of him as this Hollywood, you know, filmmaker to a point. But man, when he does violence, it's tough to watch. It's brutal. It doesn't let you off the hook. It's not fun. It's not even though like Tarantino has pretty violent sequences in his films, they're kind of like Sam Peckinpah sequences where they're like really exciting and fun and like, oh, this is great. But when Refn does it, it's not. It's like, oh my God. And then
I mean, that's kind of like that's one of the big hinge points in Drive is that they build up this relationship between. Does Ryan Gosling get a name in that movie? Or is he just the driver? I think he's
just the driver, yeah.
But like they build up this big relationship between him and this single mum with a kid, and they put in a situation where he has to defend her using violence, and the violence is so much that she just kind of can't deal with him after that point. Because, you know, it's not enough for him to defeat this guy. He literally stomps him to a pulp in the corner of a lift. And it's really, like, it takes a long time. It's really hard to watch.
He does that in Valhalla Rising quite a lot. It's kind of a Viking type story. Mads Mikkelsen plays. He has no name. In fact, he's called No Name. But I think Refn kind of hints at him being the god Odin. He's one eye, and the story is very similar. But it's a very unique film, but extremely violent. Well, actually, I think Neon Demon's one of his least violent movies. I can't think of any on-screen violence throughout the whole film.
No, I mean, in terms of people fighting each other, there's really not. In terms of like seeing bad things happen to people's bodies, there's the ending sequence. But yeah, it's not. There's not.
I forgot about that. There's a bit right there at the end where you do see some on-screen violence.
But you're right. It's like there's really not a lot, and that's one of the things that I find really, really interesting about the movie is that. I came up with this term, which someone else might have already come up with, but this idea of like horrific weight, like the load of information that's being communicated to you that is a bad thing that makes you scared in the movie. Like that's all implication, all and sometimes it's implication that misdirects you, like you were saying with these male characters who are kind of introduced as aggressors and then subverted.
Yeah.
But it's all framing and light and color, you know?
Right. So have you heard, have you seen the work of Robert Eggers, who did The Witch?
Yes.
That was his first movie. And then he did The Lighthouse. Did you see The Lighthouse?
I haven't seen The Lighthouse. I would like to. I really like The Witch.
Yeah, okay. So Lighthouse, I think, is on Neon right now. And I'm pretty sure it's at the library. You can rent it. But The Witch is another one of those movies where there's not a lot of on-screen violence at all, but it is this tone. It's this, I can't remember what the word you just used a moment ago, but it's the horrific weight. It's just sitting there, and it's dread. It's what it is. It's just this feeling of dread that's created with this imagery and these sounds and the narrative that's going on. But really, it's not Jason Voorhees stabbing someone to death, and then killing people off one at a time. It's just this horrific weight, I should say. I think that's a good way of putting it. And I think a lot of people don't like that because it does make you feel uncomfortable.
It does. And I mean, the Witch does it by creating this situation where there's no escape and there's not really any possibility of survival outside of the little family unit that you're watching, because if people aren't familiar with it, it's set in early colonial times in America, and so this family have been outcast from their religious community and they're living by themselves in the woods trying to be self-sufficient. And that if they don't, they all die. So there's it's almost like putting them in a spaceship. There's no possibility of rescue or anything like that.
But yeah, that movie, along with The Lighthouse, which you should see, there's little to no on-screen violence per se, but there are things going on behind the scenes. Well, just like Elle Fanning's character Jessie, in the end of the movie, you don't see what they do to her. You just see the aftermath of what they do to her. It's like, oh my goodness, this is horrific. Had you seen this stuff, had it been a lesser filmmaker who showed you the murder and showed you what they did to the body, that's a different kind of film, and a different kind of audience enjoys that kind of film. But that's where Refn is the opposite of that. He just took a hard right and said, no, this is the film I'm going to make. I'm not going to show you that stuff. And it's more horrific for me as an audience member to not see that stuff. I find on-screen gore not to be a turnoff in terms of I'm disgusted. I'm just kind of, a lot of times, I was like, eh.
No, I agree with you. Like, there's only so much bodily trauma that I can look at before I start to feel like it's gone past it. Unless you're Peter Jackson making Brain Dead. Just the idea is like low budget guts explosions. Right. Constant. I mean, I can get into that because you saw a sign on the door that said like constant guts explosions, and then you went in and you got what you paid for.
You knew exactly what you were getting into, yeah. But those movies are fine too. When you can tell they're having fun, and being in the film industry and knowing how they do some of the effects and stuff, you see some scenes, you're like, oh well, that's pretty cool. They did a really good job. The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. It's a pretty gruesome film. But just the technical prowess, like, wow, they really did that. That's really cool, But I typically am not drawn to that kind of thing, because most of the time it's done in poor taste. And I would almost rather them not show me The Thing and it be more horrific than show me The Thing. And I think Refn, in this film, does a good job of that.
Yeah, so I want to briefly talk about Only God Forgives because it was a thing. Like, I got through it and then saw at the end that it said dedicated to Alejandro Jodorowsky, and that made a light bulb go on. I was like, okay, I understand what you're trying to do, but I still can't entirely decide if I liked it or not. But I guess the thing I want to put to you about it is, because you described it as a swing and a miss, and I think swings are notable because it's better to swing and miss than just not swing. Yeah. But if I were to describe the swing, I would say it's an attempt to make a Jodorowsky movie like backwards, like from the wrong side of the mirror, like. so that's a movie about this awful person played by Ryan Gosling who is eventually murdered in Indonesia or somewhere like that.
Yeah, somewhere in Southeast Asia.
By like a native police officer who's been going around and doing vigilante murders with a big machete. And you hardly ever see any of that stuff. That only happens at the very end. And it struck me when I saw the like note on the credits that Jodorowsky would have made that movie following the machete guy around, kind of going on this like spiritually motivated vigilante thing, and it would have been whatever it was. But like Refn decided to do that from the opposite perspective, and that's a fascinating thing to think about doing, but doesn't.
Well, Jodorowsky, I actually show his El Topo. Did you ever see El Topo?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
So I show that every year in my class when we're studying surrealism in my film classes. That's the first thing I show them, and it usually shocks the hell out of people, right? And but I think that that film is I think the film is about the creative process and the cyclical nature of it, and butting up against society. And society, you know, they're at the very end. So it's a Western, right? You get all the townspeople who are coming against him, and they're trying to shoot him down, and they can't shoot him down. He just keeps taking the bullets. And he's the artist, and all these very religious townspeople are trying to kill him, and they can't kill him. And then pretty much the only thing that can kill him is him. And so he self-emulates, and then is not reborn, but his son carries on that legacy, you know, after that, and he becomes the artist, and the film just goes in a circle. And I find that to be sort of apparent inside of Neon Demon. I read somewhere, and I don't know where this came from, don't know how official it is, but the Jenna Malone's character, who's the makeup artist in Neon Demon, apparently she's based on Jodorowsky. And I don't know where that came from. I read it on IMDb, but I don't particularly see that either. But maybe that's something Refn said in an article. And knowing that now, because I read it after I watched the movie, knowing that now, I wonder if I went back and watched it, if I would see something different about her, because she's not a good person.
No,
fact,
I mean,
not at all. Actually,
nor is Jodorowsky. I mean, he is a deeply problematic gentleman, and also like he's one of these guys who really sits on the line for me between like literal, actual wizard and con man. And like the whole thing about the version of Dune that he wanted to make, like that's him just surfing ahead of the wave of people catching up on the con for a lot of that time. And I mean, maybe it would have been an amazing movie, but it's also definitely an attempted scam.
Have you seen that documentary?
I have not. I would really like to.
It's really hard to find. But yeah, that's Jodorowsky's Dune is the name of that one. But he, I quite like him. He's extremely polarizing in that most people hate him. But I think El Topo is a masterpiece. And The Holy Mountain, which is what he did after that, which I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that John Lennon helped finance. Or was it George Harrison?
I think it may be both of them. I did, in fact, an episode on The Holy Mountain, which listeners can go back and check the archive of podcasts for. I talked to May of the YouTube channel Nick Spheres about The Holy Mountain. It's great, and definitely there was Beatles money involved. I forget exactly which Beatles. But
he's still alive, Jodorowsky.
Yeah, he's still out there doing things. He makes he writes a lot of comics.
Oh, does he?
Yep.
Yeah, I've heard about some comics that he did. Is it a series that he's jumped into, or is it his own unique thing?
I think he has done both. He's done some standalone things. He's got some long-running series. There was one called the Incal and one that's split off from the Incal called the Meta Barons. And I've read, I think, all of the Meta Barons, this is like the most Jodorowsky thing in the world. It's about a family of space mercenary men where every generation the son is maimed by the father and then kills the father. And there is only one meta baron, that is the son who is currently doing the thing. Right. And it follows this like series of men who are all maimed by their fathers and then kill them dynastically throughout the comic series.
That's very much part of I did a paper when I was in university. So Star Wars, right? But Star Wars would have got that from an ancient tale called the Shahnameh, which is about a father and a son. The father was this great warrior. They're separated at birth. He becomes the evil one. The son becomes the good one. He's maimed by his father and ultimately kills his father. It is Star Wars. I wrote a paper about that for non-Western literature.
I mean, Jodorowsky has some big, because his big heyday was in the 70s, so he's got some very kind of 70s masculine concerns, and that comes through in the Meta Barons. One of the guys gets his pelvis destroyed by some science fiction weapon that's not very important. The important thing is that he then gets a robot crotch that holds his legs on and has no genitals on it. And that clips into the control mechanism for his spaceship. So he's literally flying it with his dick. And he says, I will pilot with my instinct. It's very that thing.
Yeah, that's very much him.
Right, this is a fascinating conversation, but we do have to take our halfway break, so we will be back talking about Nicolas Winding Refn again, probably, right after this.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
And we're back. You're listening to Reserved Recommendations. I'm talking to Derrick Sims about Nicolas Winding Refn, and we just had a longish digression about Jodorowsky. So I wanted to return to your idea that The Neon Demon in particular is this movie about the creative process, because the very, very final bit of it made a thing about the very, very final bit of it click for me. So that if we're going to follow this chain, there's the idea that this woman Jessie kind of becomes herself so powerfully that she kind of becomes the defining figure in her field. She's like the Bob Dylan of modeling. You know, you can like or dislike Bob Dylan, but he is definitely a singular yardstick by which you could compare other things. Right. Then the other people who are operating in that field kill her and consume her. But the thing that happens at the very last is that they actually can't contain her. Like they start vomiting bits of her up quite literally because she's too powerful for them, and that kills them. And that reminded me of we don't need to go into him in detail, because he's only tangentially related to the importance of the story. But there's an Italian horror author called Thomas Ligotti. I think he's Italian. He might be American from Italian extraction. Anyway, the thing about Legotti is that he got this style of sort of cosmic horror, and people compared him a lot to Lovecraft, of course, as one of these great singular figures. But a thing I saw written about Legotti is that the metaphor that someone used was like he ate Lovecraft, when lots of people attempt to eat Lovecraft and instead are eaten by Lovecraft. Like lots of people end up making Lovecraft pastiche. This guy Legotti actually ate Lovecraft and transformed it into his own body and made his own thing. And that kind of final like cannibalism and rejection metaphor, I thought, tied into that, like the idea that they try to eat this person and they fail, but maybe if they were more singular themselves, they would have successfully eaten her.
Yeah. I think that the going back just a little bit, there's a moment in the movie where she's slowly kind of buying into her own. I don't like this kind of term, but buying into her own hype at a certain point. At first, she's just this beauty. Let's call her the artist, right? And so she's just this artist, natural and pure and perfect. And then there's a moment when they're inside a restaurant, I believe, and there's a casting. There's a not a casting agent, a designer, a clothing designer who she's impressed, and he's asked her to be the lead in his new line and the catwalk and all that sort of stuff. But they meet, and she brings on the guy from the very beginning who was taking her photos, who's sort of a boyfriend type character, but then he realizes she's underage, and he makes a bit of a joke like, I need to go away, I can't do this. And she's like, no. They work it out, and anyway, they have a really nice, innocent, sort of relationship, and you really, it's at this point inside this restaurant that she starts to turn to the dark side, if you will, but she buys into her own hype. She's sitting there talking to this guy and this girl who ultimately eats her, and this other woman, and they're talking about this sort of natural beauty and how the thing cannot be captured. You either have it or you don't, and no amount of cosmetic surgery, no amount of practice or whatever, nothing will give you it. You'll always just be just under it. And anyway, the guy gets into an argument. The young guy, it's a very tame argument about he's kind of got this idea of it's what's on the inside that counts. It's none of this, and the guy's like, bullshit. It has nothing to do with what's on the inside. Beauty is the thing. It's the only thing. And and then the guy the young guy looks over to Elle Fanning and says, "Hey, let's get out of here." And she says, "Well, then go." And you're like, oh, man. So she's starting to transform at this point. And this is either right before or right after. Maybe it's right after she does his show. And for the first time, she's wearing black. And she's got this dress on that kind of comes up over her neck or whatever. And this is where she's having these visions, and she's looking into the mirror of herself. There's like 3 versions of her. And apparently this was improvised on set. But Elle Fanning kisses one of the mirrors of herself. And yeah, so she's starting to buy into this kind of I am what I am, and I can't be touched. And she starts ruining that. And she's kind of becoming a bit more like the girls that she's that are hating her, and she's kind of buying into her own ego or whatnot. And then at the end, they consume her. Before they consume her, she's there on the diving board. And it's just the most arrogant, egotistical thing. It's kind of, this is her pinnacle. It's just a really low angle from inside the swimming pool looking at her on the diving board. And she says, pretty much, I am perfect. I cannot be touched. I'm above you. Goodbye. And then immediately the attack begins and they consume her. But I think, too, it's this a kind of commentary on ego as well. And a lot of these people, like Jodorowsky, like these, I don't know about this guy you're talking about who you said actually consumed Lovecraft and did his own thing. Legotti. But the others, that story is very much like Elle Fanning is the Legotti in this situation, right? And these other people are trying to consume, or maybe it's Lovecraft who is the one in this situation. Everyone's trying to consume them, but they can't be. I guess what I'm trying to say. I don't know. I'm trying to say there's this Lovecraft is a bit problematic in many ways, but did Lovecraft ever buy into himself? In the end, did he? I don't know. I don't know his work that much. But I think it's a common thing inside the creative process when someone does have so much success and they're fed this kind of thing of you are the greatest. Well, when you buy that, you're in a lot of ways you're over at that point, And so I think that's another way it kind of ties into the creative process. And I don't know about Legotti, whether is he still alive? Is he still creating these things?
I'm not actually sure on that. I don't know a huge amount about him. I read some of his short stories and went, these are quite effective horror stories. And I read something else about him where someone said that thing, and I just thought it was like that was quite a striking metaphor describing how someone could be influenced by someone really notable without their work coming off as like a pastiche of that. I mean, I think Bob Dylan would be another example. You know, there are lots of people who saw the success of Bob Dylan and then immediately made Bob Dylan pastiche, and far fewer people who saw Bob Dylan and then kind of internalized the thing he was doing and did their own whatever that thing is, but for them.
But do you think? I'm trying to think of. I don't think Bob Dylan ever bought into it. I think Bob Dylan is still the sort of guy on a pedestal. You know, even when did he won the Nobel Prize?
Yeah, he did.
Or was it Pulitzer?
No, I think it was the Nobel Prize for literature.
That's it. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think the price there with Bob Dylan is that he's done that by, and I think he would have a really hard time being Bob Dylan, like starting now. But when he was doing his thing and in his kind of most creative and most at his most famous, there was a real split between private and public in an artist's life. And so he could get away with being quite obfuscatory when he dealt with the public, which meant that all they have is the work. And I think it's much harder for people to do that now. You couldn't be the kind of weird, deliberately frustrating, enigmatic personality that Bob Dylan is as easily, I don't think.
Yeah. I wonder if there's anyone right now who I can think of who's able to do that, able to avoid. I mean, because you have social media and just everything's so public now,
that's
right?
exactly it.
So I'm trying to think of people who've stayed away from social media. Bob Dylan, he's still remained that old Bob Dylan though. He hasn't bought into the Twitter and the stuff like that. But just because I say that because of the story when he found out, he didn't find out for like a week that he even won the Nobel Prize. No one could find him. You know, he was off somewhere, and then whenever he accepted it, it was just kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think you could say, and of course he's of a similar vintage, but like Tom Waits. Tom Waits has been very like resistant to explain what it is he's doing outside of making dumb jokes about it. It's a different kind of feeding people bullshit, so they'll stop asking you stupid questions. Right. But it's like it's got the same end. But yeah, I can't think of too many others. I certainly can't think of many contemporary people, just because social media is like such a part of getting success is that level of accessibility.
Yeah, I've got someone in my head, but they don't really fit the bill. But they have stayed away from it, but by the nature of the things they did before and a thing they're doing in the future that I know of, you know, they're about to join one of the superhero things, and before that, they were a massive kind of teenage heartthrob kind of thing. But other than that, the things he's done between those two have just been fantastic, and he gives people. It's Robert Pattinson. Is who it is.
Yeah. I mean, Robert Pattinson's the I joined with Robert Pattinson is actually with Leonardo DiCaprio. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, I kind of feel like he's ever since Titanic, he's sought out either like aggressively punishing or like odd kind of off-ball roles to try and distance himself from that. Yeah. And I feel like Robert Pattinson went, how un-Twilight can I be as hard as possible? Yeah. And then you get Cosmopolis.
Yeah, which is not a great movie, but
it's very strange.
Oh, it is strange. Yeah. No, everything he's chosen to do since then is strange. He did an Aussie film called The Rover. Did you see The Rover?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, that's a great film. Shot by the same person who shot Neon Demon.
Right. Yeah. The thing I've seen his face attached to most recently was Good Time, which I haven't watched.
Oh, it's great.
But it's done by the same guy who made Uncut Gems.
Yeah.
Like is a strange word to attach to Uncut Gems, but I had a strong reaction to Uncut Gems.
It's exhilarating. Yeah, that's for sure.
Do you like the idea of a panic attack that just escalates for 2 hours with Adam Sandler in it?
Right. Yeah, well, Good Time is very in the same vein as that. And the directors, the Safdie brothers, one of them is actually in Good Time playing opposite and they're fantastic, those guys. But too, it does feel like a panic attack watching that movie too. It's just like, man, this guy can't make any more bad decisions, and then he does. It's very, very similar. But both of those are on Netflix. I think Netflix bought those rights, so definitely see those movies. But Uncut Gems, that's one that I might watch it again one day. But jeepers, at the end of that, I was exhausted. I just thought, oh my God, wow, holy cow, what a ride.
That's another one I actually did an episode on not long after I'd watched it. It is a hell of a thing. If you are prone to problems related to stress, maybe don't watch that one. But otherwise,
or maybe it would be cathartic to watch.
Or possibly,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it might drive you over the edge.
It's certainly a testament to what Adam Sandler can do when he decides to be a dramatic actor instead of a comedian. And the thesis that I advanced in the episode I did about Uncut Gems is I've forgotten the guy's name. Is Adam Sandler's character from Uncut Gems someone who believes he's in an Adam Sandler comedy? Like, if he just keeps doing the thing, everything will work out because he's the main character.
Right. And it doesn't work out for him.
No, it just keeps getting worse.
Going worse and worse and worse. Don't remember how we got on that. Robert Pattinson. Good time. But he's one that I can think of right now. And yeah, Leo kind of had that. He was the teenage heartthrob that at a certain point said no more. There aren't too many, and it's really hard. And I think it's kind of sad that it's hard that you're sort of pushed to engage on these things and reveal all your answers and reveal your intentions of things. And people ask you questions about them, and you give them answers. I do like the Tom Waits of the world that are just mysteries.
And Tom Waits talks about, he's got this concept he talks about in a few different interviews where he talks about the idea of the hair in the grate. So, in movies, when you had literal physical film, sometimes
hair in the gate.
Hair in the gate, not in the grate. Yeah, and you would get a hair in the gate. And so you'd see this line dancing around on top of the image, obscuring what you're trying to look at. And Tom Waits talks about this idea that he's always trying to introduce that. He's always trying to introduce something between you and whatever he's saying so that you have to look or listen through something to get what he's doing. He says his favorite music is the music he hears in passing in a car through a car window. So you get it Dopplering past you and then it's gone. And you have to work out what it was because it's not there anymore.
Sorry, it's a little bit off topic, but have you seen The Old Man and the Gun?
I have not.
Have you heard of it?
No.
So David Lowery, the director, he's doing The Green Knight. I don't know if you've seen it. Okay, yep. So that's his next movie, which is not getting released in New Zealand, sadly. Not yet. I'm trying real hard to get it. I have sent messages to A24 saying, please bring this to New Zealand. But he directed this after Pete's Dragon. So he did Pete's Dragon, which was kind of a passion project for him. It was a childhood movie that he really enjoyed and wanted to remake, but and it had like Disney money behind it. But then he did a Ghost Story, Ghost Story, which was. Have you seen a Ghost Story?
I have it on DVD because I got sent it by some organization or other, and I have not watched it because
if you want to sell
other
it,
things
I'll buy
keep
it from
happening.
you.
Right, I will. I need to watch it, and then I might actually sell it to you.
But the whole reason, it's a very polarizing film too. I think you'll probably like it because you enjoy this kind of thing. But Tom Waits is in The Old Man and the Gun,
right? And
it's Tom Waits, Danny Glover, Robert Redford, and Sissy Spacek. And oh man, it's so good. Tom Waits is so good in there. He has a few scenes and he's just telling stories and he's just being Tom Waits and it's so good. Definitely, it might be at the library too. It's worth watching. The Old Man and the Gun. But I love Tom Waits. And Tom Waits has not kind of, I mean, he's not refrained from the limelight. He was in Coppola's Dracula, which had a huge cast, in a big budget film.
He was in the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus.
He was.
About very strange movies.
Playing Satan in that film. Yeah, he was really good in that. So, I mean, he's doing Terry Gilliam films, which is Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. He does a lot of Jim Jarmusch's films. Have you seen The Dead Don't Die?
No, that's another one that's on my list to see. But
I think it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
But he's great in there. He just plays this bum in the woods. and the whole movie is he's not in it a lot, but most of the movie is kind of from his perspective. He's the outsider looking in on the world, and he's wonderful.
There's a really great story about Tom Waits from the book Things the Grandchildren Should Know, which is, do you know the band Eels? No. They did My Beloved Monster, which was on the soundtrack of the first Shrek movie.
Okay.
They also did... I'm trying to... the big hit was Novocaine for the Soul back in the early aughts. Anyway, basically, this guy talks in his book about always having admired Tom Waits, and he says, hey man, we should do something together. And he sends Tom Waits a cassette of like kind of doodles of songs that he thinks Tom might do something interesting with. And he gets it back, and there's one side which is Tom crying like a baby, and the other side is completely blank. And it's just like, Tom's someone who you approach and you get exactly what he's going to give you. And it's either the thing you want or it's not.
Either way, it's going to be fascinating. Yeah. But no, I love Tom Waits, and I wish there was a modern Tom Waits. I can't think of one. But someone who is that enigmatic and wasn't pressed for answers.
So you mentioned that Refn, to return, we're talking about Nicolas Winding Refn, that he's done lots of interviews and things, but I do feel like his movies at least kind of live in that space where there are these artifacts that they present you a thing and you take what you get from it and they don't really explain themselves.
Yeah, and he doesn't explain himself inside of interviews. I think he doesn't do a hell of a lot of them, but when he does, I don't know if it's a thing they put in the contract before him, said, but don't ask me to explain myself because I'm not going to do it. But he does that. Lars von Trier is also one of those. Like, you're not going to get that out of him. And I just admire people for that. As much as he's this blockbuster filmmaker, the king of the blockbuster, the creator of the blockbuster, Steven Spielberg, doesn't do director's commentaries. Steven Spielberg, a lot of times, doesn't talk about what his intentions were for this thing. And I admire that about him. As much as he's in the spotlight, I kind of miss that about people who are just allowed to, this is my work, take from it what you will. And
I think also with Steven Spielberg specifically, if you need a Steven Spielberg movie explained to you, then he has not Spielberged very well because the reason he's Steven Spielberg is that you should get it.
Right. That's true. AI.
That's true. There were lots of arguments about AI, and I think that's because it had the stamp of Kubrick on it, and so people, I don't know, they kind of they were primed in a very particular way. I think if you came to that movie not knowing who Steven Spielberg or Stanley Kubrick were and just watched it, you would probably get it.
Yeah. Well, Kubrick was one of those though that he was a recluse and you didn't hear much from him. And his daughter really is kind of responsible for a lot of the stories that we have about him because she was filming things and then letters of correspondence between him and other artists. There's a really cool series of notes back and forth between him and Saul Bass about poster design for I think it's just The Shining, but it's pretty funny. But she made public all of these things from him. Yeah, I'm trying to think of some other enigmatic guy. I guess Refn's probably one of the most. Yeah, and I find I don't really want to listen to him talk. I just like enjoying his work. And enjoy is not really the right word. I don't know if you really enjoy Refn's work. I think Neon Demon is one of the most enjoyable just because the visuals. All of his movies are, again, so visually stunning. But, man, that movie looks wonderful. Yeah. And it's I think it's easily his best looking film. I don't really like the way Only God Forgives looks. It's just those reds are just too much for me. But Drive looks really nice. Looks really nice. I use it a lot in class for demonstrations. But yeah, I like that he just presents us with these wonderful visuals and these kind of cuckoo bonkers sort of stories, and it's like, yeah, take from it what you will. Well, like the cats in the movie, in Neon Demon, it's like, what the hell, a mountain lion? Well, first off, it's like, is that a person in the corner? You know what I'm talking about, right? When she opens the door and she's like, there's something in my room, and Keanu Reeves comes up. Boy, he's a sleazeball in that movie. He is so bad. But yeah, and then there's a stuffed cat in the end. I don't know. Do you remember that?
I'd forgotten the stuffed cat at the end. I took the cat in her room being like the, you know, it's kind of overused now, but there's the trope of like something bad and magic starts happening and birds start hitting windows. Yeah. Like the just like the animals are upset by demons kind of trope. That I kind of took that as a version of that, but I'd forgotten the or possibly like a familiar almost. But I'd forgotten about the stuffed cat at the end.
Yeah, so there's like it's a mountain lion in the beginning that comes into her room. It's almost like nature even wants in on what she's got, you know. But in the end, and it's very intentional too. It's only in like 2 or 3 shots, or where it's placed in the shot, it's like they did this on purpose. But it's not a mountain lion; it's some other sort of large cat that's stuffed, you know, which, you know, you could take from it that, you know, she is this sort of natural primal kind of thing like this cat, and she's about to be stuffed. and the next 2 scenes, it's gonna not gonna end too well for her. But
look, this is fascinating. We have pretty much hit time. There are 2 things I like to do by way of wrapping this up. Right. There was a thing I wanted to mention. I'm just we'll go over time, and I just wanted to mention it because tying this back to the idea of like the creative process in any industry it's given me a whole bunch of thoughts. And just a thing I wanted to mention in passing was the point where you talked about her kind of going to the dark side. It's also interesting because that's the point at which she's kind of becoming an industry insider. Like they're kind of talking shop. And it's interesting to me that Refn is equating like gaining technical craft with the risk of losing yourself. Like that's the point at which he seems to be suggesting where it comes in, that like where you start being the kind of filmmaker who could have conversations with other filmmakers about specific lights and camera lenses and techniques is the point at which you're at risk of losing the thing. And I think because he's clearly a very technically accomplished filmmaker who has held on to that identity, that's an interesting point for him to kind of make.
Well, I do know that he do you know the Auteur Theory?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so he is not a believer at all in the Auteur Theory, in that there's no single person. Every Refn film feels like a Refn film, but it is a combination of ideas and thoughts and crafts of multiple people. And he, you know, his films are known for this visual style, but on every film, almost every film, he uses a different cinematographer. So, you know, the lighting and camera setups and stuff like that are a different person, you know, and so maybe he keeps things fresh by introducing different people rather than kind of becoming stagnant and saying, well, this team helps create my vision. You know, I think he might be very much against that, you know, so that he can keep that edge and say, well, I'm going to keep bringing in new people and try to make something fresh and new and creative and not stale, I guess, you know, that something like that might happen if he were to sort of buy into his own hype. And yeah.
Yeah, no, it was just a thought that I had that I wanted to add anyway. There are 2 things I like to do by way of finishing off these episodes. The first is to ask if you have any other recommendations for things. If people know Refn and like his stuff, are there things that you would recommend? Are there specific movies of his that you would recommend as a way into his work, because it is a little bit opaque from the outside, perhaps? Anything else that you just want to pitch for fun?
I think if you want to get into Refn's work, start with Drive. I think Drive's the most accessible. Part of it is because of Ryan Gosling and Oscar Isaac, who wasn't a big star at the time. You know these people. Carey Mulligan's in it too. You know
it's
these
got
people.
Bryan Cranston in it.
Bryan Cranston. It also has Albert Brooks, who is the bad guy in there, and he's known for being a kind of a funny man, throughout the 70s and 80s.
He's a very avuncular bad guy.
Yeah. Do you know what makes him so terrifying? He shaved his eyebrows. Go back and watch it, and he has no eyebrows, and it's so uncomfortable. But that's a good entry point for Refn. For other filmmakers, you might hear that he's compared in many ways to Gaspar Noé, which I'm not a fan of Gaspar Noé. I've never seen a movie of his that I
Now, he's the guy who did Into the Void?
Into the Void. He did Irreversible.
Right, yes. He's much more in terms of like showing you awful things and like relying on sensory overload.
Yes, yeah. And so, I would – some people might recommend him. And I do know they're friends. In fact, the guy who plays the nice photographer in the beginning who's kind of develops a relationship with Elle Fanning, he was in Gaspar Noé's previous movie, and that's how he got into this one. Because Ryan Gosling was going to play that role originally.
Right. There you go. It's a very small world.
Yeah. But so I would say no to Gaspar Noé. But I do enjoy Lars von Trier, even though his stuff is pretty bleak. He did a film a few years ago called The House That Jack Built. Did you see that?
I have not, but I believe that it is on Netflix.
It's on Canopy as well.
Right.
If you have a Palmy Library card, you can stream it there. A very shocking movie, but I surprisingly enjoyed it so much. It was my favorite movie of the year that it came out. And it's a movie about a serial killer who just goes around knocking these people off, and it's horrific. But it's so much more than that. Again, I think it's a film about the creative process and it's very unique to Lars von Trier, his recent history of things that had happened to him. And I've got a really good, whether it's true or not, I don't know. I've got a really good idea of like what he was going for in that film, and it makes it even better for me. But I really like Lars von Trier, also Danish filmmaker like Refn. They kind of were making films at the same time in the 90s. So Refn's been around a lot longer than we in the America and New Zealand.
That's right, because he did this series of movies called like Pusher.
The Pusher series.
Yeah,
but
which I don't know anything about.
Well, he even had films before that. He was making movies. In fact, there's a movie called Dear Windy that Lars von Trier directed that Refn was supposed to direct, and they kind of butted heads a little bit, and he got off that project. But yeah, that sort of Danish school of film, the Dogma 95 movement, they're kind of both from that. And I think Refn's films are a bit more accessible than Von Trier, just because Von Trier is just so depressing a lot of times.
Yep. My two recommendations would be if just for kind of sheer visual style. I completely forgot the name of the filmmaker, but the movie's called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's a black and white Iranian American vampire movie, and just
striking
endless shots that you could just like let me freeze this and pop it
in
on
black
the
and
wall.
white as well.
It's very pretty, but also requires a bit of patience because there's a lot of just like watching a girl in a cape ride a skateboard around in the dark.
Elijah Wood was a producer on that movie.
Right.
Yeah, his company's the one who took it from Persia or from Iran and brought it to the West. I can't remember the name of their company, but anyway, Elijah. You can thank Elijah Wood for that.
Also, it's a lot more melodramatic, but I've just finished watching it, and I would definitely introduce it to someone as like a baby's first. Let's go slow and have everything be very stylized. If you're okay with seeing horrible things, would be Hannibal, which is on Netflix.
Oh,
so
that's the TV series?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that.
Well, so it takes all of the characters that you know from the movies, and it puts them in this very slow, very visually stylized, increasingly gay as it goes along, very like if something could be slow and melodramatic at the same time, it's kind of that. Everything that everyone says is like freighted with implication that's not being stated. And all of the murders are constructed to be like simultaneously horrifying and gorgeous. So if you want like a a way into that kind of way of looking at pictures that's like, shorter episodes instead of 2-hour movies. I would recommend that. And it does have Mads Mikkelsen in it being very good.
Who is a Danish man who is in a lot of Refn's work.
That's right. I was reminded because he was in Valhalla Rising. And he plays Hannibal with a great deal of aplomb. He kind of walks this line between being like a very manipulative person, but also probably quite a good psychiatrist if he wasn't trying to make you murder people. And that line is very interesting.
What's that series on?
It is on Netflix. It may be on some other places.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think it got 3 seasons and then got cancelled. So it finishes on kind of a weird, like maybe ending, maybe cliffhanger. And the third season I felt was kind of weaker than the other 2 because it's more like plot and less murderer of the week, which I kind of felt like was the best format for it. But that's me. Last thing I like to do is give you an opportunity to plug your shit. What things do you have that you would like people to look at? Or even if like they're not your things, just like plug things.
Well, so I do the Tarabua Cinematheque thing.
Yes, indeed.
On Monday. I don't know when this goes out, but
this will go out tomorrow, which is meaningless for listeners. It will be the 23rd of July when it first goes on the radio. So Monday will still be Monday at that point if people live in the Manawatu.
So on Monday the 26th, we're screening the This Is New Zealand. That's the film. I came and talked to you about some stuff, but we've actually locked it in. The 77-year-old filmmaker Hugh McDonald
excellent.
Is going to be there to talk with us, and it should be awesome. And we're doing that show on Monday the 26th, 2 more shows on the 28th, and then we're doing some trying to do some other stuff with it, and hopefully program even more shows. Don't know what's coming up for the next month with the Cinematheque, but I invite everyone to. We're typically it looks like we're going to do it every final Monday of the month, and we'll screen some classic, foreign, unique. It'll be something worth watching in the cinema.
Excellent. And with the This Is New Zealand one, like that was the outcome of like a thread that you had on Facebook where people were suggesting things.
Oh, no. That was I discovered the film. Someone posted about it on Facebook in some group, and I said, "What is this?" And I just went down a rabbit hole and like, oh my God, why is this film not available? Why can't anyone see it? And so I just chased it and found a print of it. And just so happened that these people were ready to put a print into cinema. And I said, oh, let's do it.
Yep.
Let's do it in Pahiatua. So we're going to do that in Pahiatua at the Regent on the 26th. And
but find you on Facebook to find out about the other ones coming up. If
So
up
it's
for a trip to Pahiatua.
Tararua Cinematheque. That's cinema. Like I think if you just type in cinema,
it'll autocomplete for you. Yeah,
THEQUE. So that's going on, and we'll do at least 1 film a month. And I hope to do more in the future. I'm really enjoying doing these things.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes at npr.nz/show/reserved or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Objective Realty, or you can follow the show on Facebook. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.